how's everyone doing today? Welcome into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiaga, bringing you guys this live show today on April 12th. What better way to close out the week and start the weekend by tuning into the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. I have another round of stories and topics to talk to you guys about here, swirling around the NFL, starting with DeVonta Smith's new contract extension that's being talked to right now, being looked over right now, trying to get him extended. He is eligible now, so the Eagles are looking into that. Later on the show, we're going to be talking about how likely it is for the Cowboys to start looking around in the draft potentially now for a new quarterback, a long-term plan, longer, extended beyond Dak Prescott. If he isn't there come next year, if they can't figure out an extension, we're going to get into that conversation. And then towards the end of the show, surprisingly, talking about Tom Brady, the GOAT, potentially coming back and playing in the NFL. You can't get rid of this guy. He always wants to come back, always wants to be involved in football. He was on a podcast. He brought it up. He was asked the question, and he's still uttering over the fact that he could come back into the NFL. So that will be later on in the show. A lot to get into here today. Remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I get into the first segment, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments, use the tip and donations link that you see on your screen and running across the ticker below with any of your questions. The link is gsmcpodcast.net. Using that link, I'm able to see your question in the chat box. I can read it out loud on air and then carry the conversation that way, maybe take it in a different direction. It's a lot more engaging, a lot more fun for me, I think, and it's a big help for this show and the network as well. Using that link, we always appreciate you guys whenever you guys are able to do that with any question or comment. Again, the tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. But I can get into the first topic now. Like I mentioned, DeVonta Smith and his contract extension. The Eagles have been pretty busy on that part in the offseason, extending Jordan Mailata, Landon Dickerson, both getting pretty big deals. I think now they're both under contract until 2028, 2027, something like that. So they're in it for the long haul. The Eagles make sure to lock down their most important players. Very deserved contract for both of them. Landon Dickerson slowly becoming one of the best guards in the NFL. Jordan Mailata as well, one of the top left tackles in the NFL. So it makes sense. Very valid deals that both of them got. Very well deserved. And now they're continuing on this trend to try and get the contract extension talk started with DeVonta Smith. 25 years old still, under contract this year technically. And they still have his fifth-year option on his rookie deal. So there's still a good amount of time left, but he is technically eligible to that extension now to at least start talking about it. And this past year was his third year in the NFL. So after 3 years, you really get a good look at a guy and what he can bring and what more he could bring to the table as well going forward in this Eagles offense. With so many star players all around him, he still finds a way to shine in most games, still makes an impact, and then in other games is one of their best players, if not the best player on the field that day. So it all makes sense for them, the Eagles, to try and extend him. ESPN's Tim McManus said that there's a general optimism between both parties, the Eagles and DeVonta Smith and his representatives, that a deal will eventually get done. Smith is supposed to get $6.4 million this year, the last year of his rookie deal. But then, like I mentioned, they have that fifth-year option they can exercise as well. And by doing that, if they decide to do that and not figure out an extension before, he will be making $15.5 million in that fifth year in 2025 if they decide to do that. If they decide they need a bit more time to figure out the finer details of a contract or trying to figure out a number that both of them are happy with, they have that fifth-year option. He'll earn $15.5. And just looking back at DeVonta Smith, I mentioned his impact in the games, how important he is to this Eagles offense. Even with so many weapons around him, he still finds a way to improve and get better and just show out in all these games where he is, I believe, one of the more reliable weapons for Jalen Hurts. And thinking about it more and more when I was looking over this topic and just thinking about DeVonta Smith, spending a lot of time in college, all 4 years there in Alabama, he is really one of the players that I can pick out right away that came in to the NFL and was ready to just take over. At least one of the skill position players that I could think of right away. It's probably him, Joe Burrow, and I'm sure I'm missing one or two, but those two really just jump into my mind as once they got into the league, it was really seamless, a very seamless transition for both of them. They got in, and talking about just seamless transition with DeVonta Smith in his rookie year, 64 receptions, 916 yards, broke the Eagles' rookie receiving yards record with 916, 5 touchdowns as a rookie. So already, it really was no transition period. It didn't seem like it, at least with him. And then you bring in more help. You bring in A.J. Brown, and he still made sure to get his piece of the puzzle and still contribute in a major way. In 2022, when A.J. Brown was first there, he put up almost over 1,200 yards in that year. And then, talking about last year, another 1,000-yard receiving year for him, 7 touchdowns as well to add on to that. Even if the Eagles might not have finished the year how they wanted to, how they envisioned, there is no doubt that DeVonta Smith was definitely not the problem to that. He has only provided them good things, and it's obvious, more than obvious, that they need to keep him around. He just continues to get better. Is very mature coming into this team, and looking at the numbers and how this extension could potentially work out, ESPN also mentioned that an extension could fall between $25 million, sorta in the range of A.J. Brown and the kind of contract he got in 2022, which isn't bad, honestly. If looking at that contract, you think of A.J. Brown, one of the best receivers in the league. Not many receivers make more than A.J. Brown. A lot of them really just hit that cap at $25 million per year. If you're not some of the best receivers, the only receivers that make more than $25 million per year are Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, and Cooper Kupp. Those are the only receivers. Those three are the only receivers that make more money than A.J. Brown. Mike Evans just got a new deal. He's in around that range as well. So really, if you're one of the top, you get pushed into the 28s, 27s, 30s is the highest, which Tyreek Hill owns. You look at Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, CeeDee Lamb. They're receivers that want to get into that conversation. And who knows, DeVonta Smith might think of himself that highly. Why wouldn't he? But I think it'll be more realistic for the Eagles to fit him in to a 25, probably max 28, 27 range for DeVonta Smith. And it's great because all of your star power on the Eagles offense, if you sign DeVonta Smith, which I expect them to do, all of your star are under contract until the foreseeable future. I mentioned Mailata, Landon Dickerson, Lane Johnson is still there until 2026. He's on the older side, but you still got a few more years with him under contract. Jalen Hurts just got an extension. A.J. Brown, like I mentioned 2 years ago, signed that deal with them. Saquon Barkley signed this year and got a new 3-year deal as well. So you lock down DeVonta Smith, and you secure most, if not all, of your future, your essential players for another 4-5 years down the line, with players getting extensions now and later on in a few years. It's great business by the Philadelphia Eagles, which have earned a reputation of locking down their stars early, which again just is another positive for DeVonta Smith and the team, so this just doesn't carry on lingering into the season and just people keep talking about it. It's a good reputation that the Eagles have, re-signing their players, extending them, and it's great for DeVonta Smith. it's better even if they get it signed before CeeDee Lamb and Justin Jefferson, because it obviously will drive up the price range. If the ceiling of the price gets higher, DeVonta Smith might think he might have more room to wiggle with. If you sign him now, it'll only bode better for the Eagles, so that makes the most sense. And more cap room as well to not be blocked by this move. Extending him just gives you a bit more wiggle room with the salary cap going forward. It's all pointing in the right direction right now for DeVonta Smith. I don't think anybody will argue that he doesn't deserve it. That kind of contract that is seemingly just coming to him. It's just a matter of time now. If instead of if it comes, DeVonta Smith is one of the best pieces on the Eagles, and with this contract, it'll bode well both for the Eagles and Smith to just move on with it, and then they could focus on other things, the defense, the secondary, mostly on that side of the ball, to really get this group whole again, to try and compete in that NFC and rebound from the kind of year that they had last year. So that's where that stands. Pretty much all positive news coming from the Eagles. They're just checking off boxes on their offseason list. Very successful offseason. They're just moving right along as any successful organization will do. So that's where they stand on it. One of the last things they really just have to do in this offseason. I'm sure they're going to get it done. But we can move on from that and move on to more topics. We're going to go into a quick break right now, and on the other side of this break, I'm going to bring you a story around the NFL that they announced a few days ago around the helmets that the players wear, new helmet designs, rules, and new helmet models coming in 2024 that should be safer, new rules around the designs that should bring back some more colorful, fun options for these teams to kind of experiment with. I'm going to get into all those details after the break. We're just getting started here on the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. Don't go anywhere.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on their face shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my town. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news it fits. I'm losing shit, a stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Moving right along with the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast into this next segment. The NFL announced a few days ago more news around these sort of ironed out topics that they have to get that really just almost get swept under the rug. But I thought it was pretty cool the way that they broke it down with these new helmet designs and new helmet models that are supposed to be coming this year. Specifically, the NFL announced that this fall there will be 12 new helmet models, including 8 that are position specific for quarterbacks, offensive linemen, and defensive linemen. In their news release that announced this change to the helmet models, they said that 5 helmets were tested better than any helmet ever worn in the NFL, in the league. That's in their words. And then they went on to explain that 6 of those new helmet models tested so well that anyone that wears them won't have to wear those silly Guardian caps that you see players wear in preseason, in practice. It's a helmet, and then they wear that softer other cover on top of their helmet. You can find it if you know what I'm talking about. If not, I'm sure you can look it up. And it looks pretty ridiculous when they first announced that the players had to wear it. A lot of players thought it was ridiculous, but the NFL is trying to cut down on the head injuries. And with these new helmet models, they're not simply just not going to have to wear those if they choose to pick one of these models to wear. Another incentive, another motive to try and get these players to wear these helmets out on the field, not only just because it doesn't look as silly to not wear those caps on top of their helmets, but the NFL really is stressing the player health, the safety of them, trying to reduce the number of concussions, because in 2023 there was a recorded 219 concussions just last year in the preseason and in the regular season. It's the second straight year with over 200 head injuries in the NFL. You see the new helmet models. Another reason why they changed the whole kickoff format, and not the hip drop tackle because that's lower body injuries and stuff like that, but really the kickoffs and the sort of trend that the NFL is following, trying to reduce the collision speed, the impact on these players' heads, and how much they actually feel it. The helmet models is another way that they're trying to get it to be a lot more safe. I mentioned before, the new models, 6 of them being position specific, and it's a big deal getting into those because the quarterbacks are going to have 2 options to choose from, 2 different models that are brand new this year, really just to minimize the impact mainly to the back of their head. When somebody hits them in the back of their head, they kind of whip their head back if they hit the ground too hard. Those sort of contact injuries that just really go, it's almost really not intentional when they get hit, sacked, and their head just slams back. It's never really intentional or with any malice in that tackle, but it does still happen, and you hate for that to happen because the quarterbacks, some of the biggest attractions on teams and in the NFL, you want to limit that as much as possible. So the NFL has given them 2 options to try and minimize that impact to the back of their head. With the linemen, both offensive and defensive linemen, they will also have a few choices with their helmets to try and minimize the impact to the front part of their helmets, the forehead part, if you will, of their head, of their forehead, and just trying to cushion that impact as much as possible without, still taking away from the game of football. There's going to be hard hits, but they're trying to minimize that as much as possible. On that topic, in making these new models, they actually removed 6 of the currently used models in 2023. 6 of those are now not going to be allowed to be used in the NFL because they didn't meet the criteria, the requirements in these new safety rules for them to follow. So players aren't allowed to wear those models now. They got rid of 6 of them. And just with all these new changes and more safety being brought in, the NFL hopes to have positive position-specific helmets for wide receivers and defensive backs in 2025. So they're trying it out right now with quarterbacks, defensive line, offensive line. Not quite yet there with the wide receivers and defensive backs, but they're trying to get more of those in the next few years. But with these position-specific models, only 9 quarterbacks and 20 linemen chose to wear the position-specific ones, and then the majority still went with other ones that just felt better. The NFL made it a big point in their news release and their announcement that they really wanted to focus on the comfort and the fit of these new models. They believe they've improved that, but it's really still ultimately up to the players. The NFL's executive vice president, Jeff Miller, noted that there being now more options for the players. They want to continue to bring out those options for every player to choose between a couple so that they still usher in that player safety and try and find a helmet that works for them and just move on from the outdated ones that still feel comfortable but aren't as safe. They want to find that nice compromise where you can get the best of both worlds. It's still a work in progress. It's definitely not finished by any means now, but that's where the NFL's headed right now. 12 new helmets coming for the players, position specific and outside of that as well. 8 of them position specific, 12 new helmet models. It should be interesting. I do remember because this topic isn't really covered as much, and I don't think a lot of people pay attention to it, quite honestly, but just being a Steelers fan and Kenny Pickett on the team last year, he mentioned this, trying out all these helmet designs, and that kind of caught my eye just to see what kind of difference does it make, because he is one that did suffer with injuries, a couple concussions early on. So when he changed over, that kind of reduced a little bit. So that did intrigue me. And now seeing this news, I thought it was pretty cool that the NFL is doing this, trying to make it as specific to the player as possible, to the position, because not every position obviously gets hit, feels as much contact as the next. They really emphasize trying to measure, run a lot of simulations, do a bunch of tests with different helmet models, different sizes and fits and everything like that over this offseason and just over the time that they have to really make it as realistic to game, to the position as possible. I think it's great. It doesn't change much about the game at all. If they can make it more safe and things like that, that's all great for the NFL and for the players to just have them out there. The game is ultimately better when everyone's healthy and playing. So 2 thumbs up for me for doing this. But also the NFL, on a more lighter note, a more fun note, if you will, they also announced that they are expanding their uniform policy, and they will allow teams to feature a new third helmet design if they meet the criteria as well. Some teams have them. The Arizona Cardinals have their all-black helmets with the red Cardinals still on the side. The Eagles have their black helmets that they actually weren't able to wear a year or 2 ago when the NFL announced in 2022 that they were going to allow teams to have a second design. And back then, sticking with the Eagles, they had their regular helmets, and then they had their Kelly green helmets, and then that was it. They weren't allowed to wear the black helmets because you were only allowed 2. Now, teams can explore that a little bit more, expanding it to 3. It's a lot more lenient that way, and I think teams are really going to buy into it. I saw a post about the Broncos responding to this announcement, so they're all in on it. I mentioned the Cardinals. I'm sure they're going to have something with it. I already talked about the Eagles. Their owner, Laurie, talked about it a few times last year and into this year about their helmets and saying it's a shame that they couldn't use it because of the rule. Now the NFL has opened that up a little bit more, but the only thing that's specific about this announcement is that only the teams that are going through a redesign already, that are in the process of changing their design, redesigning some of their helmets, uniforms, they're the only ones that could have it available to them for this coming season with that third helmet option. The other teams that weren't redesigning already will have the option to in 2025 if they inform the NFL that they're going that way before May 1st. So there is still some time, but some teams will unfortunately not be able to have it for 2024. They're going to have to wait a few months until next year, but that's really the only thing stopping about it. So there's that, and there's also some restrictions that come along with this new design, new rules that the NFL implies to all the teams that are able to go with a third helmet design. The second and third alternate color helmets must be historically compatible with the colors and design of the classic uniform if they want to pair those two together. That's one thing that the NFL asks for. Another rule, I guess you could say, that they want implemented is that the alternate helmets can only be used with the authorized classic or alternate color rush uniforms. They can't be used outside of too many uniforms, just the classic, the alternate, and the color rush. That's the only uniforms that the helmets can be matched up with. Then moving on, the third helmet designs, second helmet designs must have the same fit as the primary ones, same make, model, and size as the primary ones. Pretty simple to follow. And the last one is that the helmets, if they want to wear them for, let's say, week 3 or week 4, the week leading up to it with practice and everything, that team has to wear that ultimate helmet for that week, at least 1 week before the game that they decide they want to wear it for. Following all of that, then the teams are able to debut these new helmets if they follow everything that I just laid out there. And I think that's also another cool thing to see because teams, fans just like seeing different uniforms and bring back the old classic ones, different makes, and just bring back some of the classic ones. It's also very interesting to see out there. It just changes it up a little bit from just always seeing the home, away, typical uniforms. I know as a Steelers fan that they have some pretty cool designs. More on the uniform side than anything. The helmet also does change a little bit, but not too much. Seeing the Bumblebee uniforms and stuff like that, other designs that they've brought out before and way back, years past, it's always cool to see. They only really change it now with like the block letters on the Steelers uniforms. That's as exciting as it gets now. Hopefully this opens it up a little bit for certain teams to experiment more. See it just bring another different layer, different flavor to these games that, you look at a game and it's exciting, but you see different uniforms, different colors and stuff like that. That always adds to it, makes it more appealing just to the visual aspect of the game. It's always better that way, in my opinion. The NFL, I think really more than not, this offseason has changed a lot and has really tried to make a lot of changes this year that bring in more people. The games on Christmas, the games on Wednesday in Brazil, these helmet design changes. It seems like they're really trying to bring in more and more people. It's either that or I'm just noticing it more now, but I like the way that they're going. I like the way this is trending, and hopefully they become a bit more lenient with some of these things, the allowing players to wear different numbers. All of that, I think they shouldn't be so strict about it. Having these players experiment with different things, I think it always makes it better, makes the league more exciting, and yeah, I'm a big fan of it, just the way that they're going. Saying that, we can move on with the show and a new topic after this short break. After this little pause in the show, I'm going to be talking about the Cowboys and Dak Prescott. It could be looking more heading into a divorce now with the Dallas Cowboys and Dak Prescott. Not officially, but the way that the contract's laid out and the draft, now you have some people saying that they could be a sneaky competitor in that quarterback market in the NFL draft. So stick around to see what they're saying about that possibility and what I think of it, how likely that is. That's coming up, as well as Tom Brady talking about a potential return to the NFL. He was asked about it. He answered it truthfully. I'm going to tell you more about what he said and what his options could be if he returns. So more on those stories after the break. You're listening and watching to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Continuing on with today's live episode, I want to remind you guys, if you have any questions or comments on the past segments or on these other segments that I'm going to bring up, use the tip and donations link you see on your screen right now, gsmcpodcast.net. Using your questions and comments with that link, I'm able to see your question pop up live in my chat box. I can read it out loud on air and talk about it, have more of a conversation. It's very fun, more engaging that way. It's also a big help for this show. So again, The tip and donations link is gsmcpodcast.net. We always send you guys a big thank you if you're able to use that link with any of your questions or comments. Like I mentioned before the break, more on the Dallas Cowboys, their quarterback, Dak Prescott. It's a big deal because more and more that you think about it, you break it down, we have this conversation about the Cowboys and Dak. It just seems like it's pushing more and more towards a divorce, a just split, this being the final send-off for Dak and the Cowboys, because right now Dak is on the final year of his current contract that he's on. He was franchise tagged in 2020. Then he signed that deal that he's on now, that 4-year, $160 million deal in 2021. $40 million per year, $126 million guaranteed. And probably the biggest thing about it is no trade clause, no tag clause. So no real room for the Cowboys to find a solution to trade him elsewhere, because he could just say no, he doesn't want to do that, go to that team. He could shut that all down. They're not able to tag him to extend their period of trying to negotiate something with him. That's also not allowed with that clause in his contract. And if Dak leaves after this year, a lot of talk has been made about the dead cap money number. That exact number, more and more I've seen people dispute the large number that was out there, first reported by Adam Schefter on the Pat McAfee show. If you saw the clip or saw that show, on that show they were talking about this specific scenario if Dak leaves, and on there Schefter said if Dak left after this year, the dead cap hit would be $95 million, and that they would have to try and spread that out because $95 million is an insane amount in dead money. He has a $55 million cap hit plus the 40 next year is how the Schefter and other people got to $95 million. That's where that number came from. That's what he reported and said on the show, the Pat McAfee show. But I'm just seeing more people, more sources close to the Cowboys, more articles that dispute that, have a rebuttal to that, and just saying that that number in totality is wrong. It's really only that $40 million that they'd have to spread out going forward. I won't get into all those details because a lot of the sources that I read and saw videos on, they went really deep into the contract and the bonuses and allocating bonuses somewhere else instead of there. It was very confusing to follow, but they provided a lot of stuff. So if you're interested more in that, go check those out. You could just find it searching it up. But regardless of whatever the number is, Dak will take up a big cap hit if he leaves. If it's 95 or 40, 40 is still a big number for a quarterback in dead cap money if he leaves. On top of that, that's a lot of money just going out the window. And regardless if they sign him, and it's still going to be a lot if they sign him, you think, all right, well, if it's so much, they have to work out a deal. Well, if they try and work out a deal, it's said that he wants around $50-60 million per year. That's what sources have said, coming out of Bleacher Report and other news sources. That's the number that has been thrown out there. I haven't seen a different number so far. They haven't really talked about it because the Cowboys and Dak Prescott haven't really engaged in any contract negotiations up to this point. So, what are the options for the Cowboys if Dak moves on? This has to at least be a thought, a passing little moment that you stop and think, all right, well, what if Dak isn't on this team? What are the options if it comes to that panic mode button, if we hit the red button and it just all blows up and we have to take a last minute decision on where this team can go, because it's too talented, in my opinion, to go into a rebuild, to try and take years finding a new quarterback, being about 500, a little bit above, making the playoffs, not making the playoffs, and just really ending with that same result. It's been like that already for a number of years. They're really trying to get over that, but right now they're in front of a massive mountain to climb and get over with this talented team that they have. So It has recently developed. Adam Schefter, again, was on ESPN a few days ago saying that the Cowboys would be a sneaky team for him in the quarterback market in the draft to at least look at some of the prospects in there, where before heading into the draft, heading into February, you would have never thought the the quarterback position would be on the list of needs for the Dallas Cowboys. But as this goes on, as the weeks go by, as we get closer to the draft, it's starting to become a little bit likely for the Cowboys to at least look and see what they have offered to them in that position. And weirdly enough, if you think about it, back to 8 years ago when Dak was drafted in that 4th round, there were reports, rumors that they were looking at Paxton Lynch in that draft. And it's all just funny how it lines up, because 8 years ago when they drafted Dak in the 4th round, I don't think you had anybody saying that this kid was going to be the franchise guy, and looked as he is looked at now in the league. But back then, Tony Romo was on the expiring deal, was heading towards the end of his career. And now, funny enough, Dak is on the last year of his career, moving on from the Cowboys. Is this another situation where history repeats itself? They get somebody in the 4th round, 2nd round, definitely not earlier. There's no way it's earlier, but maybe 3rd round, you have somebody there sitting there, you take a risk on them, and then can you get lucky twice? We'll see, but it is just funny how it all lines up like that. Again, they find themselves in a similar situation again with their quarterback. A little bit different because Tony Romo is heading towards the end of his career. Dak is still in a position where a lot of teams are going to be vying for him in free agency if he decides to leave, which is becoming more and more likely. Like most players, most quarterbacks that get these massive contracts, all it takes is for one team that doesn't have a great draft pick, doesn't have a lot of assets to trade, know that Dak Prescott is available. All that has to happen is for them to offer him a massive contract. Not saying that that's the only thing that matters, but a lot of people just don't turn away from a massive 4-year, 3-year contract that a team offers you. Regardless if they're great or not, it is something to just say, nah, I don't think I want it. I'm good with that. It's a very real possibility in free agency that he just leaves. And you look at quarterbacks now, Adam Schefter compared him to Kirk Cousins this year when the Falcons offered him that mega deal, $100 million, or actually more than, I think it was $180 million deal for Kirk Cousins. That kind of money is what we're talking about with Dak Prescott in Schefter's estimation. So it can be a real possibility that the Cowboys, what do they do? Who do they look to? I mentioned the draft. Is that a real possibility? This is where I kind of divulge from that idea of drafting a quarterback. The question is posed. It is a real question. I admit that. But in my opinion, I think right now they have Cooper Rush and Trey Lance on their roster. Right now, saying that, it doesn't fill you with a lot of confidence, right? One, because you've seen already Cooper Rush come in, be the quarterback of this team for a few weeks. He did all right, had his moments, but you don't want to depend on him week after week. That's the reality. Then you have Trey Lance, which interests me a little bit more because Trey Lance, to me, is just as good right now as drafting a quarterback. The idea of bringing in another young guy to learn the system, to try and get his first reps in the NFL, to think lightning's going to strike twice is very, in the same spot, is very optimistic for the Cowboys to think that, one, they can't really get one of the best quarterbacks in the draft unless they trade their number 1 pick and trade a lot more than they really have to move up there. That is a very wild scenario that could happen, I guess, if they want to trade the number 24 pick and maybe some more picks, throw in a player. Here's a crazy thought. Maybe throw in CeeDee Lamb or definitely not Michael Parsons, but throw in like CeeDee, a first round, and a few others to move up into the top 4 or something like that. It's absolutely crazy to think like that, but with how their cap is going right now, is that something you think about to move up and get one of the top guys I think it's unlikely, but it's an option. Maybe when that second round comes around and Michael Penix is still there potentially, or they trade up in the first round to 13, 12 if the Raiders or the Broncos are set on taking Bo Nix or Michael Penix. They trade up and try to get one of those guys or wait it out. Maybe they're there at 24. You can get one of them in. Hopefully they move into the second round. That's also another option. But again, I don't like that idea. There's a lot of options there, but I don't like that idea because you look at Trey Lance, really the piece that I think is basically what you're trying to acquire in drafting a quarterback. He's just as good as any rookie in the sense that no experience, no real reps in the NFL. He's already been in the Cowboys locker room, knows the environment at least a little bit than somebody who's brand new. And he's still at a young age. I think he's 24 or 25 at most. He's still trying to make an impact in the NFL, trying to get his shot. He's just been a backup for the majority of his career. He had that bad injury with the 49ers, and then after that, he's just been floating around to the Cowboys just as their backup. No real thought that he'd ever start, but here we find ourselves in this situation with Dak, and thinking that you're just going to draft another quarterback instead of focusing on the other positions that the Cowboys clearly need, I think is not the smartest move, in all honesty, trying to do that and gamble on bringing in a quarterback that you think you see something in when you already have basically a rookie on your team. I think in that scenario, the Cowboys just have to take a chance with Trey Lance, and if it does come to Trey Lance starting at some point because they have no other options, you have to just try and give him a shot at least at the job. That's what you traded a fourth-round pick for, to bring him in. You just didn't trade that fourth-round pick for nothing just to have him sit on the bench that whole time. You have to see what you at least have in him, where he is in his development, what kind of prospect, what kind of player he looks like out there on the field. And at worst, it doesn't work out. It looks awful. You lose some games because of him. You bring in Cooper Rush anyway to play some games and just close out a season. It would be awful for it to come to that point, but then at least you have answers, definitive answers on what you have. You know that you don't have enough, so then you go out and look for a quarterback, free agency through the draft. I think this year is way too early to start thinking like that because you still have Dak obviously on this year, and you don't want a situation similarly to the Patriots where you have Bailey Zappi, Mac Jones, two young guys competing for this job, and then 1 week they play great, another week, 2 weeks goes by, they don't play great, the fan base is on them, they want him out, you bring in the other one, he doesn't look much better, then you have to have this quarterback roulette going on in your team, and it just looks very bad. You don't want to compare it too much with the Patriots, but that's just one similarity that you see in other organizations where you want to avoid with the Cowboys. You want to make sure you have a definitive answer at the quarterback position, and drafting one to answer the question, I don't think it's that likely. It's been brought up now more because people want to have answers to what the Cowboys do with their quarterback position if Dak's not there, but I just don't see it really maturing into this scenario where they feel confident in going out and getting a guy in the later rounds and thinking it's going to develop the same way it did with Dak. It's not realistic. They have too many holes on their offensive line, defense as a whole to try and fill. To use it on a quarterback, I really think, honestly, would be a waste. So right now, I can't see it happening, but you never know what will go down at the draft. It is a question being posed out there. I'm sure the Cowboys have seen it. I'm sure they're at least thinking of a plan B other than Dak Prescott. Hopefully, they give Trey Lance a shot and not risk it too much with the draft. I think this year's just a year to try and fill those holes, and then once the problems arise, if they do arise at some point, that's when you address it. This offseason hasn't gone great for the Cowboys, so you can't just try and salvage it with making a big move like this. That's where it stands right now. That's how I feel about it. I would love to know what you guys think. Drafting a quarterback, are you on that? Are you against that? What other options if I didn't mention them in this segment do you think the Cowboys have? Do you think it's smart for them to re-sign Dak, to give him that amount of money? Put it all down in the comments or in the chat box as well during the live shows. But in the meantime, we're going to move on with the show. The last break of the episode coming up in a few seconds. Then, to close out the show, we're going to talk about Tom Brady and potentially making a return to the NFL. My thoughts on it and more details on what he said specifically on a podcast interview yesterday. Stick around to find out more on that story shortly after this. I'll be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Thank you for joining me on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast to talk about the latest news, breaking news story that has come out in the NFL. Just yesterday, everybody is talking about Tom Brady once again. He remains active in the offseason if you haven't seen already. You always see him on commercials, talking somewhere, on podcast interviews and stuff like that. He is going to be more in the social media side of things, in the broadcasting side of things around the NFL this coming season when he is supposed to broadcast games on Fox Sports for the NFL. But now a wrench gets thrown into that whole thing when Tom Brady appeared on a new podcast called Deep Cut it's produced, hosted by a barber / influencer that interviews people while giving haircuts, the whole vibe around the Deep Cut meeting. The barber's name is Vic Blends, and he started this, and to have already an interview with Tom Brady already caught my eye, but then it is what he said on that interview in that podcast episode with Vic Blends when he asked him about returning from retirement, returning potentially late in the season when a team is missing a quarterback, they're making a late playoff push. What are Tom Brady's thoughts on potentially coming back and playing once again, unretiring for a second time? I'm starting to lose count of it, quite honestly, at this point with Tom Brady, but brings up the idea of not being opposed to it. Those were his words, and if you look at the video on Twitter, anywhere where it has been posted, Instagram, platforms like that, he really like brightened up and started smiling and was pretty happy that he asked him about it. And if that doesn't tell you everything you need to know about him still feeling that he can play, wants to be out there, that told me everything really that I needed to know on how he truly felt about it. But in his answer, he kept it a bit more tame, a bit more level, by saying, I'm not opposed to it. I don't know if they are going to let me if I become an owner of an NFL team. I don't know. I'm always going to be in good shape, always be able to throw the ball. So to come in for a little bit, like MJ coming back, I don't know if they would let me, but I wouldn't be opposed to it. Referencing Michael Jordan when he also returned from a second retirement to play for the Washington Wizards, which he actually also owned a piece of at that moment when he came back from that second retirement. So there is similarities there. I just feel like the NBA is more open to that sort of thing happening. Their player association is a lot more outspoken and a lot more involved in situations like this. I think with the NFL, they have an NFLPA, but it is still very much 70-30, 80-20 in how lenient the NFL is with their NFLPA, whereas the NBA, just from my personal opinion of seeing some of the moves, some of the transactions and things that the NBA PA suggests, that one seems a bit more 60-40 with the NBA and their player association. The NFL, from my point of view, is a bit more strict with that sort of thing and that relationship. But before his responses, Brady and Vic Blends brought it up to him. Before the quote I read, he brought up the 49ers, the Patriots, and the Las Vegas Raiders as possible options for Tom Brady to go back to. He just threw them out there in conversation, and those, ironically, are the teams that not only does he have connections with, but connections in different ways. Obviously, he played with the Patriots for the longest time. He had that dynasty there. The 49ers didn't play for them, but he is from California, grew up a Niners fan. That never materialized into anything. There were always rumors about it, but obviously they struck gold, brought in Brock Purdy, drafted him. You know how that story goes. And then with the Raiders, the funniest thing about it is that he is trying to be an owner of the NFL Raiders, and they're in that process of trying to get that official. Roger Goodell has talked about it and how it's in the process right now, but that sort of big move to have Tom Brady be an owner of an NFL team obviously takes some time. It will drag on, I feel like, a few more months. And to have him now come back and play for them, if in some crazy world he does come back and unretires, that would be a very funny situation to see how the NFL handles that with him trying to be an owner of them. But in the article that I read about this whole situation and just informing myself on this before I came on here to talk about it, one thing that was pointed out that almost changes everything about this whole interview and how it's all laid out, that the Deep Cut podcast, where this whole interaction took place with Vic Blends and Tom Brady on this podcast, it's actually produced by a company called Shadow Lion, co-founded by Tom Brady and his manager Ben Rawitz. It's responsible for many of the commercials you see Tom Brady in. He's everywhere in a bunch of betting commercials and other commercials outside of the NFL and things like that. It is responsible for a lot of his social media presence, and it kind of controls that aspect of Tom Brady now in the offseason. You see him pop up everywhere. Shadow Lion is responsible for that, is the company that sort of produces that whole thing with Tom Brady. So in saying that, it has those responsibilities and how much attention Tom Brady now gets, not being in the NFL, but still being Tom Brady. People want to know what he's about. That company that he co-founded produces this podcast. So if you want to connect the dots with me a little bit, how much more attention would a new podcast get produced by a company that Tom Brady owns, founded? How much attention would that new podcast get, trying to launch itself into stardom, into fandom, trying to get as many eyeballs on it, then having Tom Brady, arguably the best quarterback of all time, go on there and say, yeah, I'm still thinking about playing. I could potentially go to so-and-so, throwing out some of the biggest teams out there that are connected with him, throwing them out there on one of the early episodes of this podcast. You can see where I'm going with this. Going on their early doors and saying something like this, it's going to draw in more people to this podcast. I'm not saying it's fake that he doesn't want to come back and play, but it is a little fishy. It's genius, honestly, by Brady to do this on a new podcast, say something like this, and then not really mean it. For all we know, it was just complete. It was a complete lie that he's even thinking about it. But when he said it, how he brightened up, I'll go back to that. I think he still wants to, but I don't think he really, really desires to go back there and try to get hit at his age, try and go through the long process of it again. It was just a way to get people maybe talking about this new podcast, tune into it, follow it now more and more. I'm not saying it's the real reason, but it is funny how it all works out. Doing a little bit of digging deeper into this situation, you see the behind the scenes connections to all of this, and you could start making your assumptions based off of that. And also, Brady already retired. He came back. He retired again for good. And when he made that beach video announcing his retirement, but he still seems like he's got that want to go out there and compete. I just think it came to a point where the process, it's in Tom Brady, one of the best ultimate competitors out there, but at the end of the day, specifically with these three teams that I mentioned, the Patriots, where they're at right now, I don't think that's realistic at all to bring in Tom Brady. The Raiders, again, similar to the Patriots, they're a little bit better, but that whole situation with him trying to be an owner of it, I just don't think the NFL will let it happen, like Brady mentioned. And then you have the 49ers that is never going to happen because of Brock Purdy, how much they love him there in San Francisco. Their CEO, Jed York, mentioned talking about Brock Purdy, extending him, really liking the problem that they now have trying to pay a very good quarterback. I think they're all in on him, so that's really the furthest one that I think could ever happen. But this, again, is just a way for Tom Brady to, I think, just ruffle some feathers, do a little bit of trolling. He's done a lot of that, really letting his hair down a lot in the offseason after leaving the Patriots, really how much you've seen now of Tom Brady's personality, how much he's let himself go a little bit. I think it's just nothing more than Tom Brady having a little bit of fun with it. I think it's true to some extent, but I don't think he's really committed to coming back and being in that whole mode of NFL quarterback, trying to make the playoffs. Especially with these teams, it would take a lot more out of him. At that age, I don't see it being realistic, but I think it's fun. It's a fun idea to throw out there again if you're Tom Brady. He is scheduled to be a broadcaster now, so he has that commitment. I don't think he would just back out on that, just off of the person that he is and being all in on something. He's mentioned that he is training for it and taking it pretty seriously. So, again, that's another reason why this whole thing just doesn't line up. It's funny that he threw it out there. I think it's great. It's genius for him to try and get more notoriety to this show that is produced by a company that he co-founded. It's great. Tom Brady's always a step ahead of everybody. He's a genius when it comes to this sort of stuff and getting people to talk about him. Stays relevant. Now he's going to appear on TV in a few months, so he's just always there in the back of your mind thinking something related to Tom Brady. It's a great move by him. It was funny, but it's definitely not something that I'm anticipating happening. But if you guys think differently, please let me know in the comments or in the live chat box as well what you guys think about it. Maybe other teams you would like to see Tom Brady go to. If you want to see him give it one last go at it. I just think we're past that point now with Tom Brady that people just got to let it go. People just got to let it go. Tom Brady's not coming back. He's got to let it go, honestly. If he even thought about it for a second, let somebody else have the spotlight. It's Patrick Mahomes' league now, really, in all honesty. So that's where we stand on it now. That's where that topic kind of lived and sort of died off there right now in the news media. More people will talk about it, but I don't see it really materializing into anything. But in saying that, that will be the last topic we go over on today's episode. I have run out of time on today's show. I want to give a big thank you to you guys for listening and watching this episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. Please remember to like, follow, and subscribe to the show, as well as following the GSMC Network on other social media platforms like TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter to catch up on the network's content outside of sports as well. If you want to see more of me and this show, you can go on and check out the GSMC Sports Network YouTube channel and the GSMC Podcast Network channel for YouTube shorts that are posted on there daily, every weekday, I should say. Full recorded live shows that you can go back and watch an entire show. They're all on there as well. Or individually recorded segment videos. If you missed a certain segment or want to go back and rewatch a specific segment, they're all on there as well on both channels. Please remember to tune in every weekday at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time for more NFL conversations and topics and discussions to get into with me, your host, Manny Maradiaga. Wishing you guys all a great weekend. Thank you guys for tuning in to today's episode, and I'll see you guys all back here again with me on Monday.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.